It's the Franklin Show, live from Franklin, with America's favorite adopted pup, Franklin Delano Roosevelt Lloyd Wright Sinatra Seltzer, and his friend and favorite Franklin dog adopter, Michael Seltzer. I'm your announcer, former big-time radio legend in my own mind, Dick Purton. And now, here's Franklin.
Wow, what a great audience, and thanks to my fabulous band once again, and welcome everybody to the Franklin Show, a special 1-hour edition. I am so excited to interview the two guests that I have had on my mind for a long time. You're going to hear from the great Bill Dow, a former columnist for the Detroit Free Press and author of the book on Tiger Stadium. And you're going to hear from Jerry Rosen, the Honorable Gerald Rosen, who wrote The Grand Bargain and saved Detroit from bankruptcy. So stay tuned. Franklin Show is upcoming with a very special edition coming up right now.
Be right there. Wait. Use the shovel and bucket of water, remember? Drown, stir, drown, feel. Then make sure it's cool.
Where'd you learn that?
SmokeyBear.com. Brushed up on some tips before we left. Don't want to start a wildfire, right?
Only you can prevent wildfires.
Well, hey there. All right. On the Franklin Show, my special guest, and this is the first time we've ever had a guest from Switzerland or anywhere in Europe, and so I'm very pleased and proud to have Mr. Bill Dow, a fabulous, well, what you're called now is a freelance writer.
Right.
And by freelance, that means that you work for free, right?
Yeah.
No.
Not really, but no.
Yeah, okay. So, but you are a professional and wonderful writer, well known to people who know writers, and from Detroit. You were the sports writer for the Detroit News.
Well, I did a lot of freelance sports writing for the Detroit Free Press, and I still occasionally
Like I said, the Free Press. Yeah. You heard me right.
So I've been doing it for 20 years, and also with Our Detroit Magazine and D Business Magazine.
I was going to lean into that. But your background was at the Free Press, not the Detroit News. So
as a freelance, that's right.
Yes, sir. Yeah, and well known to Detroiters, and an author. And one of the great books you created years ago was about what we belovedly call today still Tiger Stadium.
Right.
And by that I mean, they changed the name to Comerica Park. Well, that was like when DTE Energy bought Pine Knob. And no one in their right mind would ever say, well, I got tickets to go see Tom Petty at the DTE Energy Theater. No. What they said was, I got tickets to go see somebody at Pine Knob. And so now, finally, years later, Comerica Park, I still call it Tiger Stadium, but, years later, Pine Knob is called Pine Knob again. So I'm waiting for the smart people at Comerica Bank, who are shutting branches down all over metropolitan Detroit, including in Franklin, to rename that stadium Tiger Stadium. But anyway, that's just me. So let's talk about the book that you did on Tiger Stadium.
Yeah. Well, I did the book with John Davids, Frank Rashid, and Mike Betzold, and John Pestier, who was a architectural critic. And Frank and John were members of the Tiger Stadium fan club along with me. So we tried to help save the stadium from 1988 until it went up all the way to the Michigan Supreme Court in a case, actually. So we all love Tiger Stadium, and Frank had the idea of doing a book, and we broke it up into different sections. And the section I worked on was why I interviewed former players, umpires, people who worked at the ballpark, and who shared their reminiscing about, that great ballpark, and which many people still miss, frankly. And so it was a labor of love to work on that book.
And I remember, that whole exercise with the Friends of Tiger Stadium, and I was there the last game, obviously.
Same here.
with my son, who was a big baseball fan since he was born on opening day 1984,
Ah,
then the year we won.
no kidding.
And then I remember, entering Comerica Park for the first time, and without question, it's a spectacular architectural improvement. But all that nostalgia, was just so remarkable. And yeah, we missed that. And now, of course, there is no such thing as Tiger Stadium. It's gone. I think it's apartments or condos or something.
Well, there's condos that surround the field, but the Detroit Police Athletic League actually have a baseball diamond that they also use for soccer and I think some football in the outfield. The only thing remaining from Tiger Stadium is the flagpole in center field, but they kept the dimensions really quite accurately. The only thing that a lot of us were upset about is they put in artificial turf, and which they're going to have to replace in about 8 years or 7 years because those don't last forever. They last about 10 years. They're very expensive. And it's just too bad they couldn't have kept the actual diamond. But it's nice there's not a big box development on there.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not real. I don't think the condos are that attractive, frankly. But it's better than having a huge, big box place on that famous field where there were 9 World Series, 3 Major League All-Star games, 2 NFL World Championships were played there. Place for the last time, it's just was full of history. It was a great place to watch a ball game. So
Yeah, it sure was. And your book is available, I'm assuming, on Amazon.
correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so folks, if you're interested it's Tiger Stadium, Bill Dow. Just look it up.
Yeah.
Find it on the Amazon and press that thing, and then 2 minutes later, someone's going to ring your doorbell with the book. That's how that works.
Yeah. Well, thanks for the plug, Michael.
Yeah. So you said this went all the way up to the Michigan Supreme Court.
Right.
Did that happen to go before the Honorable Judge Gerald Rosen by any chance?
No, it went up to Lansing, Judge James Giddings.
Oh, okay.
And I don't want to get too much in the lawsuit. It's kind of complicated, but
Yeah.
the Michigan Strategic Fund provided financing for part of the state, Comerica Park. And we challenged it, stating that there was not an appropriation done by the legislature. It's basically done by a commission. And so there were no hearings when the decision really from the legislative standpoint. So we challenged it. And, but, we lost. So we tried. We had a number of things. We had 2 ballot initiatives. We won the first one in the city of Detroit, where we got a law passed that prohibited the use of city money to pay for a new stadium, and then it was reversed about a year later, by the public. So it is what it is.
I wish I knew about this earlier and had it been brought to my attention. I don't know if you know this, but I'm not only an international notary of great acclaim, I am an elected official, as you may know, in the village of Franklin, 5-time re-elected councilman.
Right.
I could have done something with executive action. I do a lot of that.
Yeah, I bet. Well, it's great that you're serving the community like you have, Michael.
No,
Not
I don't know
only
if my
the council, but
constituents
having your
actually,
show.
I don't know if my constituents actually believe that, but nonetheless, here I am.
Yeah.
So now up to the present as a freelance writer. You're
Right.
doing a lot of stuff for our Detroit magazine. I'm intrigued by some of the subject matter. You've done some beautiful stories about the Rooster Tail, about the Motown Museum. I mean, you've done some great work.
Thank you so much.
Any particular favorites that you want to talk about here?
Well, one of my favorites that I looked into was there's a famous Detroit News photo that was taken of Gordie Howe, Al Kaline, and Joe Schmidt. It was a Detroit News photo that appeared on the cover of a Detroit News magazine article in 1963. So it was a color shot. I still have the original issue that I got as a kid. And I was able to go to Wayne State University Walter Reuther Library, where they have a lot of the original negatives from the Detroit News, and they have that from that photo session. So we took one of the shots from that photo session and we produced it. And I wrote about those 3 players who, if there was a Mount Rushmore of Detroit sports figures, they're their features would be carved into it because, especially for baby boomers, those three players, Joe Schmidt, the captain of the Lions in the 50s, in the early 60s, Hall of Famer, of course, Gordie Howe, who was like the Babe Ruth of hockey, Hall of Famer, and then Al Kaline, of course, all heroes to people growing up in the city. So that was fun to show that photo again. But I what I do is I look for photos typically from the Wayne State Walter Reuther Detroit News collection. They also have the Tony Spina collection, the famous Detroit Free Press photographer. So I'm starting to use some of those photos. So I'll look for a historic photo and then do research on what it's describing. The one I did last month was on Robin Seymour, the famous Detroit disc jockey. And that was fun researching Robin. I remember as a kid growing up listening to him on WKNR and watching him on the Swingin' Time show on Channel 9 that he
Well,
hosted.
that reminds me now of how you and I got connected
Yeah,
because you went to school with Deborah Seymour, Robin's daughter.
I did.
And Deb called me after that piece ran and said, "Do you know Bill Dow?" And I said, "I certainly know his name and reputation." And as you know, I was very close to Robin all the way up until his passing. He and I had been friends for decades, and I convinced him to write the story of his life,
Oh,
which
wow.
is called "The DJ Who Broke 1,000 Hits" or something like
Or
that.
launched 1,000 hits.
Launched 1,000. Thank you for reminding me about the book that I.
Right.
And you can also find that on the Amazon. Type
Right.
in Robin Seymour, the DJ. And so I encouraged Robin to. He said, "Who's going to care?" I said, "Robin, you're a legend in Detroit." And he
Right.
said, "Well, if you will help me, and then yes, I'll do it." Now Robin was in his 90s, and so we got the book published, and then I said we got to get Robin back to Detroit to do a book signing and have a big DJ reunion. We brought him back. We had him at the Motown Museum. People were lined up for hours to see him and brought in groups of 10 or 15 because it's a small venue,
Right.
And Robin would tell all these fabulous stories about being the DJ on Keener 13 and CKLW and the host of the Swingin' Time TV show, which was just mesmerizing. And then we took him over to the Novi Showcase in Novi, had 500 people buy tickets to come in and meet Robin. It was the most unbelievable experience for him. And Deborah said to me, "Mike, I am so glad that you did that. I had no idea how loved my father was."
Yeah.
And
No, I tell you, Michael, I was one of the ones who bought one of those tickets. I was there, and
yeah,
I met Robin for the first time, and Art Shergan, produced, as you know, Swingin' Time, and who played Bozo on Channel 9. So it was
yeah,
a thrill for me to meet those gentlemen. And I ran into Deborah. I
yeah.
hadn't seen her since high school.
That's,
And that was such a great show to have those people come together like that.
I
And
have a picture of Robin and Art Servey hugging each other. These two were legendary broadcasters in Detroit.
right,
As you said, Art was Bozo the Clown.
yeah,
And this was the last time they would ever see each other. And then, of course, Robin passed away in the spring following that event. And I cried like a baby when Deborah called me. I'll never forget where I was because I just love the guy. And I'm
yeah,
so proud. And then we did a documentary that was on PBS about Robin Seymour.
yeah.
And
Well, yeah, that
so-
was a great documentary. And I'm sorry, I didn't say Art Servey. I said Art Shergan.
yeah,
Somehow Art's in my mind because that reminded me of an article I did for Our Detroit about 20 years ago that I really enjoyed doing on the Beatles' first visit to Detroit. And Art Shergan was the promoter. So I'm mixing up the arts.
yeah, yeah. That's an easy thing to do. Let's talk about the Beatles then. Did you get a
Yeah.
chance to actually meet the Beatles?
No, I didn't. But what I did was this would have been in 2001.
All right, then never mind.
No, I would have been 9 years old. But
Yeah.
what I wanted to do an article about their first visit to Detroit. So I pitched it to Our Detroit magazine. They said, "Oh, that's great." So I go to the microfilm research to read out how the Detroit News and the Free Press covered the Beatles. Well, what I discovered, and I forgot, there was a newspaper strike in September of 1964. I had nothing to go on but a strike newspaper that had about 3 paragraphs about the Beatles and the concert. Somehow I forget how I found this out, but I found out the promoter was a guy named Art Shergan. I interviewed him in Birmingham. he was about 90 years old when I interviewed him. He told me that Bob Green of WKNR was the MC of the show. So I contacted him down in Houston. I hunted him down.
Mhm.
He was very helpful. He gave me some great quotes, sent me some audio of the WKNR broadcast when they came off the plane. And I asked him, I thought they stayed at the Sheraton Cadillac. He says, no, they stayed at the Whittier, on the river across from Belle Isle. And I thought, oh, that's right. Because I remember some enterprising person got the Whittier Hotel to cut the bed sheets of the Beatles, these little swatches, and they sold them. So I called. You're not going to believe this, but I called the Whittier, and it was a senior residence community. I don't know what it is now. It may be empty. And I said, I'm just curious, does anybody there knows where the Beatles stayed and anybody still working in the building? And they go, no, we know where they stayed. It was a penthouse on the top. And I said, well, can I come down and take a look at it? They said, sure. Because I wanted to see what it was like for the Beatles. What did they look at? They're looking out at Belle Isle. They took me up there. It was this beautiful suite. It was empty and the paint chips are falling off. It was, no furniture or anything, but there was a fireplace. There were like 4 bedrooms. It was a huge suite. And it had carved on the over the doorway, yield crow's nest. Anyway, that's how my article starts out. But I go downstairs to leave in the lobby and I see the guy in the reception area. And I go, I was just curious if somebody was working here at the time, because you think someone might have stayed with the building. The guy goes, no. And he goes, wait a minute. He gets on a walkie-talkie and he comes up, he calls a custodian up. And this man comes up and I don't know how old he would have been. He had to have been in his 60s. He would have had to have been maybe 70s. And I go, how long have you been working here? He said, 1963. He stayed with the building as maintenance. And I go, well, do you remember when the Beatles were here in September of 64? He goes, do I? He goes, I saw them come down the elevator and they got into a white step van. It wasn't a limousine. I don't know if you know this, but it's true. The Beatles a lot of times would go into flower trucks and other things besides limos to avoid the fans. But he told me about that and the kids breaking the revolving door he broke the revolving door at the Whittier. So, I mean, how lucky was that? So anyway, it was fun. They played for 30 minutes. Believe it or not, 30 minutes.
Really?
Yeah, the tickets were $3.50 at Olympia. They gave 2 shows.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, I could go on blabbing away about it, but
no, I love that, and I think I've learned some things here because I have paparazzi following me, as you would imagine.
Right.
So I'm going to be looking for step vans in the future. I think.
Yeah, exactly.
Or flower trucks, that'd be perfect.
I interviewed Art Shergan's son, who lived in Chicago, because he goes, my son was there for the concert. He was a little kid. He was like, 8 or 9 years old. And he goes, what was it like? Did you meet him? He goes, yeah, I met him. And he said, and Paul McCartney was playing with a yo-yo. They used to have battery operated yo-yos. They'd light up when you'd throw it. And he saw me and I was fascinated with it. And he said to me, would you like this yo-yo or would you like one of my boots? and of course, you know what he picked? The yo-yo.
Of course.
Which he said he proceeded to break on the playground a week later. So.
Oh, God. I hope he still has it, though. Even if it's shattered, it's worth
I know. Yeah, I don't know.
So you're telling me that at those Olympia shows, they only played for that short period of time?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, very short.
These weren't like big 90-minute concerts?
Yeah, they had. No, they weren't. No, this was before that. They gave 2 shows. And the intro acts were the Bill Black combo. Bill Black was the bass player for Elvis Presley. There's a group called the Exciters. The Shirelles were another one so there were like 3 or 4 opening acts for the Beatles. And, I don't know if you know this, and it makes sense. Their amplifiers were so small, those little Vox amplifiers. And it was so loud there because I interviewed a couple of people who were there. Their police officer put bullets in their ears. It was so loud. The only thing you could hear a little bit was the drum a little bit in the background, but there was so much screaming that you couldn't hear them singing. And, that's one of the reasons why they stopped touring in 1966. They couldn't even hear themselves singing. I mean, they're just the people screaming so much. And they played one other time at Olympia in 1966. And, but yeah, it was a different time.
It was. And the amazing thing to me about the Beatles is that little window from 1963 to 1969 when they broke up.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the change in their presentation and music style, and the change in the country from these little innocent looking mop top guys from England with these, suits and ties, to a few years later, long hair, experimenting with, drugs. They went from I Want to Hold Your Hand to Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds.
Right.
It was a very short window, and it really tells you a lot about the 60s.
And then they won a Grammy last night. They won a Grammy for Best Rock Sound for a song called Now and Then, where they took John Lennon's voice, where he was roughly, practicing, and they used AI, and they brought in Ringo and Paul, and they, I guess, added to it. And then the Rolling Stones won also. I mean, that may say something what's happened to rock music a little bit. But.
Yeah, I take your point. In fact, just last night, my wife and I and friends went to see Tommy James and the Shondells.
Oh, sure.
And there's nothing more fun than watching a classic 60s artist performing every song that you grew up loving and giving so much back to the audience, because he's a very generous performer, Tommy. He goes out into the audience during Moni Moni and works the crowd, and he's hugging people and signing autographs and taking selfies.
Oh, that's cool. I would have loved to have seen. Where were they performing?
The Celebrity Showcase here in Warren, which is a theater in the round.
Yeah.
So you cannot get a bad seat because the stage rotates around, and so you get to see everything while they're playing. The opener was the Association, which is still an existing band with the original artists.
Oh, you're kidding.
They introduced themselves. Along Comes Mary and Cherish. And they introduced themselves and said, of course, we want to introduce the newest member of our band from Hawaii. And they said the gentleman's name. He joined us in 1972.
Oh my gosh, that's hilarious. So, I would have loved to have seen those. I love both those groups. And did they sing Crimson and Clover?
Of course they did. I've got it all on my phone. If you go to my Facebook page, America. You'll see all the videos that I took of Tommy James and the Shondells and the Association. I do this because it gives people pleasure to see these artists that they can't see, or for whatever reason. So they did it, and I've seen Tommy James probably 3 or 4 times, and I brought along a whole gang of friends because I said, "You guys have to see this. He puts on an amazing show. The man's got to be close to 80 years old, but he's out there swinging and rocking.
And he still has the pipes, eh?"
Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
I think he's from Michigan, isn't he? From Southwest Michigan.
Niles, Michigan.
Niles.
Yeah. We've look, Detroit has an illustrious history. So talk to me about the Motown Museum, because that's another wonderful story that you did recently.
Oh my gosh, yeah, that was a lot of fun. I've been through that so many different times. I mean, first time I actually went there, this would have been in the late 80s. I worked in the Fisher Building when I was practicing law. And I went down to the Motown building, the Hitsville USA building, and I knocked on the door. This is before it was really a very active museum and before they really fixed it up. But Esther Gordy Edwards and her secretary, Doris Holland, were there. No relation to Holland Dozier Holland, but they let me in the door, and they were the nicest people. And I'd go back there probably 2 or 3 different times. And then I've been there many times when people come from out of town and they've never been to Detroit. I always want to take them there. But I had pitched a story for the music issue, and to Kate Walsh, the editor of Our Detroit, and I said it would be great to do a photo story about the studio. So Robin Cherry was kind enough to allow us to, the head of the museum,
right?
Barry Gordy's great niece, I guess it would be, and they allowed us with a photographer to go in there, and we had the studio ourselves for about 2 hours. And he took dozens of photos of the studio, so I was able to then also research different aspects of it. One thing I noticed, because when you go in the museum, the first thing you do, if you recall, is you sit and watch this 15-minute film about Motown, and you're sitting in this little room, and there's a window behind where the screen is, but there's curtains, and I never paid attention to the room until I was in that studio doing this photo shoot. And I went in there again. I looked. There were microphone jacks hanging from the ceiling. And it turned out was that room was an isolation room where the Detroit Symphony Orchestra would play the strings. So, and they don't mention that on the tour. So these people who go in there sitting in the audience there to watch that film, you're actually sitting in the former isolation room where the strings were arranged and played by, Gordon Staples was the concert master for the DSO. He was a violinist, and he led the Motown strings on so many great songs. And anyway, there's all these nooks and crannies, and in that studio. It's so small, and you really do, like I mentioned in the article, you walk in there with other people touring it, and there's this silence, like you're walking into this sacred ground. You can't believe how small it is, as you know.
It's awe-inspiring to go in there, and they've kept it in its original state.
Exactly.
You actually see Berry Gordy's little apartment.
Yeah.
You see the reception desk with a notepad, one of those old notepads that people used to have where they would write down who called and what time and what their phone number was.
Right.
And I have been in there many times, of course,
Yeah, sure.
But one of my favorites was back in, I think it was 2009, the Van Morrison Band came to Detroit. I follow Van all over the world.
Right. I mean, you're a friend of his, I know.
And we are well acquainted. And I was able to get a special private tour for the band at the Motown Museum. And I can tell you, the musicians, who are mostly UK based, Brits and Irish musicians, were just in absolute awe of this incredible experience, and were touching the pianos and touching the amplifiers, and it meant so much to them. We took a picture of us all gathered in the front of the studio, in front of the building.
Right.
And they speak about it to this day. When I'm together with the band, they'll often say, boy, I love that opportunity. We had to go see the Motown Museum. So if you haven't been,
incredible. When you think about it, that studio was used from 1959 to 1972. It was open 24/7. They'd come in there at 2 a.m, writers, producers, musicians, singers, and work things out. And one of the coolest parts of that, if you remember, in the control room, where they would be there behind the glass looking out into the studio, the snake pit, was where the floor is worn out. The tile is so bare from their tapping their feet, and stomping out the songs, right?
Think about how Berry Gordy recruited these kids from all around the neighborhood. There's a map in there that shows where Diana Ross lived, and she was across the street from Marvin Gaye, and around the block from Levi Stubbs. And all of these artists came from the hood, and we groomed them and helped them perform and create this craft that today is still beloved. You can still go see the Four Tops of the Temptations, not the originals anymore, unfortunately.
Except for Otis Williams, the founder.
Otis. Yeah. And they did the Temptations play at the Fox Theater this past summer. It was on Broadway, and I've seen it on Broadway. I went to see it in Detroit, and Otis was there. And at that point, there was everybody in the house was pulling out their cell phones and getting as close as they could to Otis. And God bless him.
That's incredible.
Well, this has been a spectacular, almost half hour with you. You're an intriguing and wonderful guest, and I'm so glad that we reconnected after all these years.
That's great.
And I wish you all the best. I'm so thankful that you were gracious enough. I don't know what time it is in Switzerland, but whatever time it is, it worked out. And are you going to be back to Detroit?
Yep. Heading back in 3 weeks. I'd love to get together with you sometime, Michael. And I really enjoyed talking with you today.
We will definitely make that an appointment. And thank you so much, Bill Dow, for joining us on the Franklin Show today. And folks, check out Bill Dow on Amazon. Find his book. The Robin Seymour book is in there as well. And we'll be right back.
You're not going to get it all right. Just make sure you nail the big stuff.
Mama!
like making sure your kids are in the right seat for their age and size. Get it right at nhtsa.gov/the right seat.
Okay, everybody, welcome back to the Franklin Show. And my very, very special guest, I am humbled and honored to be in the presence of a man who has the most beautiful robes because he is the Honorable Judge Gerald Rosen. Not only is he honorable and has beautiful robes, in full transparency, he's my next door neighbor. So I know more about this guy because I know when he's smoking a cigar. I know when he's out barbecuing. Jerry, welcome to the Franklin Show.
Morning, Mike.
Good
Good
morning.
to see you. Wish
Now,
you were back in town here to appreciate all the snow.
well, I'm grateful not to be in town, and that's why we're doing this virtually because I'm smart enough to know when to be out of Michigan. Okay, and that's what made me number one on all platforms in talk television. All right, now on to this. So Jerry. By the way, I just had a wonderful interview with your friend and his, Bill Dow, who said, "Send my regards to Jerry Rosen." He thought he was introducing me to someone I didn't know, and he said, "Have you ever thought about interviewing that Jerry Rosen? Just wrote a fabulous book." And I said, "Jerry Rosen sounds familiar. I think I lived next door to him for about 30 years now."
Well, Bill is actually one of the reasons why the book got published. He interviewed me, and I sent him a copy of the book, which I hadn't done anything with for 10 years after the bankruptcy. Asked him what he thought, and he said, "You've got to publish this." And he helped me find a publisher.
So he's a good guy. By the way, you didn't send me
a great writer himself.
Yeah, you didn't send me a copy of the book, but nonetheless, I'm going to read it. But I know the story because I know you because you told me the story. And so, but the general viewing audience here may or may not know. So let's talk about the grand bargain that you are the architect that saved Detroit from bankruptcy and helped rescue the Detroit Institute of Art's art collection. The community owes a great deal to you. In addition to being a federal judge appointed by President Bush and having that illustrious history, you're an author, you're a lecturer, you're a speaker, and a heck of a guy. So let's talk about the Grand Bargain, your new book, which will be on the screen, and people can go to the Amazon on your phone or on your computer or wherever you go to the Amazon and you look up Jerry Rosen, you type that in there, it'll come up, you press the thing, and boom, it'll be on your doorstep the next day.
It's actually Gerald Rosen. The publisher persuaded me to use my formal name, but it's also, we also have a website. The publisher has a website. It's grandbargainbook.com. You can order it from them or you can order it from Amazon. At any rate, Mike, probably the best place to start is where Detroit was July 13th, 2013 at 4:06 p.m. when the petition was filed. Detroit had been moving toward insolvency and bankruptcy for decades. There's a great line from Ernest Hemingway's book, The Sun Also Rises, when the character is asked, "How the heck did you end up in bankruptcy?" And he says, "Two ways, gradually, then suddenly." And that's certainly true of Detroit. So let's go back to July 13 of 2013, when the bankruptcy petition was filed, and see what the situation was in Detroit. There are two aspects to life in the city of Detroit, or in any city for that matter: the financial quality of life and the quality of life for the citizens. So let's talk first about the financial quality. Detroit was more than $18 billion in debt. They had not been making pension contributions to their retirees for several months at that point, and the pension funds were $3.5 billion underfunded, conservatively stated. It was really more than that. The city had less than 8 weeks of cash on hand, and they were hemorrhaging money with no reasonable likelihood of turning it around. That's just a few of the indicia. Also, their credit rating was at junk status and falling. I didn't know you could be at junk status and fall even lower, but they were. So let's look then at the quality of life. There's an antiseptic term that bankruptcy experts use called service delivery insolvent, which means that a city really isn't a city at all. And that was certainly true of Detroit. The population had declined from a high of almost 2 million people to under 700,000 people, and the population loss was accelerating. Police response time was over an hour. It's now down to 11, actually under 11 minutes. 11 minutes is the national average. 40% of the city's 90,000 streetlights were out, and there was no hope to fix them because all of the copper wire innards had been scavenged for scrap. 150,000 blighted homes and lots, mostly hosting prostitutes and squatters and drug dealers. There was the water and sewer system, as all of us who are here remember, was collapsing, and in another antiseptic term, it had outlived its useful life. Garbage wasn't being picked up, snow wasn't being plowed, and the DIA, the Detroit Institute of Arts, as you mentioned, was really the city's only asset at the time. So that was where we were when the city filed its bankruptcy petition in July of 2013.
Who was the mayor at that time?
Dave Bing was the mayor.
Yeah.
But remember, Governor Snyder had appointed an emergency manager, Kevin Orr, to basically take over and run the city. And Kevin did a terrific job. He had the hardest job of all of us in the bankruptcy. He not only had to deal with me and Judge Rhodes, who was the judge presiding over the bankruptcy, but he also had to run the city.
Right. Okay, so pick it up from there.
Yeah, so when I was first appointed, I was the mediator. My job was to get deals. And to get deals, you had to either have money or assets that could be monetized into money. And the cupboard was pretty bare. There really, as I said, were no assets other than the DIA. And I remember I was down in Florida on a golf vacation when I was first appointed with my son, Jake. He was 15 then, Mike. And I had taken a lot of reading with me. And I remember reading Kevin Orr's proposal for creditors. And when I got to the asset section, it was very, very thin. And I remember thinking to myself, he did list the DIA, and said he had retained Christie's auction house to appraise the value of the art. And I remember thinking to myself, my goodness, what have I gotten myself into? My legacy is going to be the guy who liquidated a world-class collection of art and Detroit's cultural heritage to sheiks in Dubai and oligarchs in Russia. It was a pretty startling thought. And so I was down in Florida, as I said, talking to the lawyers for the creditors and the lawyers for the city. And almost every conversation ended the same way. Everybody said they wanted to work together with me, collaboratively, hopefully find resolution. But the conversations would end with, and what about the art? And everybody was looking to liquidate the art, which I thought would be just an awful idea, Mike. Detroit had been cannibalizing its heritage to mortgage its future for decades. And I thought that this would be liquidating the DIA, I thought would be the exclamation point on Detroit's obituary.
Devastating.
In many ways.
Yeah.
Not just culturally and for our pride of our city, but Detroit, the Detroit Institute of Arts anchored Midtown, you'll remember, and it was drawing between 550,000 and 600,000 people a year into Midtown. And if we had liquidated it, it would have been like dropping a hydrogen bomb in the middle of Detroit. It would have sucked the life out of it, because it was feeding, with all these people that were coming, it was feeding all the cool new restaurants that were there and the little shops and Shinola, and it would have been devastating.
And so you then took it upon yourself to create this grand bargain.
I did a doodle, which is miraculously is now hanging in the Detroit Institute of Arts as symbolic of the solution to an $18 billion bankruptcy. And I'll tell you how it happened. I got up very early in the morning. I'd been taking notes, and I'd gone through all the note paper, and on the cardboard backing from the legal pad that I was using was there. And I made myself a pot of coffee, went over to the legal pad and saw it. And I'm a compulsive doodler, Mike. I've doodled thousands of doodles all my life. And I had this idea that maybe we could put the art in a trust, lock it off from all the other creditors, and leverage it to raise money and give all the money that we raise to the retirees to mitigate their pension losses. So I put a circle to the left, and in that I put state. Then I drew arrows, and I put a circle in the middle, put art, and then I drew arrows from that circle to another circle to the right that I called pensions, and drew arrows to that with dollar signs to indicate that we would raise money, put it through the trust, what we were calling then the art trust, and give it to the retirees to mitigate their pension losses. Because Kevin Orr was proposing 30 to 35% of pension cuts to both the uniforms and civilian retirees, which I thought would have been devastating. And so I did the doodle, wrote a few ideas below the doodle, and when I left Florida, I put it in with the stack of reading I'd brought. And when I got back to my office, I put that in a stack behind my desk and forgot about the doodle. Didn't forget about the idea. I was very focused on the idea, but I forgot about the doodle till about 6 months later, when the grand bargain was pretty much completed. So the idea behind the grand bargain was to raise as much money as we could, get the state to kickstart it, then get anybody else we could find to participate and chip in.
Can you name some of the significant contributors, or is that?
So let's start with the foundations. These are philanthropic foundations that are just remarkable because they had no obligation to help. I first went to the state and to my friend Rick Snyder, who was the governor, and he was, his mantra was relentless positive action, and he was positive, but his answer to whether the state would participate with what was characterized as a bailout was no. And then I asked him again, and his answer was still no. And I asked him again, and finally his chief of staff called me and said, "With all due respect, Judge Rosen, what part of no don't you understand?" So I happened to
get that a lot.
So I happened to run into Miriam Nolan in the deli across the street from the courthouse. She asked how things were going. I told her not so well, and I said I had an idea. Invited her to my chambers, and I spun out this idea of what became the grand bargain. And I asked her if she could call her friends. She was the president of the Community Foundation of Southeast Michigan, but much more than that, she was a very well-respected person in the philanthropy community around the country, really around the world. She was very well known. So she sent me the email addresses. I sent them an email, and on November 5th, they all came to the courthouse, and I had my mediation team there. I had 7 members of my mediation team. All of them were there. And we told them about the bankruptcy, and I gave a little opening statement and spun out my idea of the grand bargain. Um, I thought that the discussion would take about an hour. They'd listen politely and get back to me a couple weeks later and say, "Gee, great idea, but not really in our mission silos." So fortunately, that's not what happened. The first foundation that came in was the Ford Foundation. Darren Walker was the brand new president. He became president of the Ford Foundation about 2 or 3 weeks before the bankruptcy petition was filed. And Darren came back on December 9th, and he said, "My board is inspired by your idea, and we're going to make the largest grant commitment we've ever made in our history." Of course, I didn't know how much that was. I had no idea. And he said $125 million.
Wow.
I almost fell out of my chair. And then
Wow.
my old friend Rip Rapson, he was my doubles partner in Washington about 50 years ago. And he called. He's president of the Kresge Foundation, and he said they were in for $100 million. And then I started hearing from others. The Knight Foundation, Alberto E. Vergaren, and the Mott Foundation, and several. Ultimately, we got up to 13 different foundations that contributed, and ultimately we raised $830 million total, but $380 million from the foundations. So
I'm
when I
so grateful that you didn't think about knocking on my door. So I just feel like I saved myself $150 million. And
you never got the email?
That's one of the reasons I changed my email address. Wow, man. And so, I mean, and look at where Detroit is today.
Do we have time? I should quickly tell the next 2 pieces of it, because
Yeah,
there
no,
were 3 legs to the grand bargain.
yeah,
There
go ahead. Go ahead.
There were the foundations, and there was the state, which of course had been saying no. But I went up when we got pledges from the foundations. I went up to my old friend Rick Snyder, and I said, "This is an assetless bankruptcy. We can't leave this money on the sidelines. You made a courageous decision to put the city into bankruptcy, but you can't throw up your hands now." He asked me what the commitments were, and at that point we're at $291 million, and he said, "Really?" He has a kind of a high voice. We talked a little bit more. He asked some very, very penetrating questions. I guess I answered him okay, because he asked me what I was asking, and I said, "I think you've got to at least match the foundations. I think we're going to get to 350 million, maybe more from the foundations, and you've got to at least match." He was sitting next to me. He reached across, we shook hands, and he said, "This will be a partnership." So that was the second leg. The third leg was, we still needed more. The DIA itself, since it was buying its independence from the city's creditors, had to have some skin in the game. So I started working on Gene Gargaro, who was the chair of the board of the DIA at the time. Got him up to a soft commitment of $50 million, which wasn't enough. I told the governor that was their commitment. He agreed it wasn't enough. And he said, "But I'm going to Washington at the end of the month to get an award from a group called the Americans for Art. And I'm going to ask Gene to go with me." So this is a great story and so insightful about Rick. The night before he was going to go to Washington for the award, he calls me about 10:30 at night, and he says, "Guess what I've been doing for the last 2 hours?" I said, "I don't know, Rick." "What?" He said, "I've got the DIA's audited financials." Remember, he's a CPA. He said, "I've got the DIA's audited financials. I can see how we can save him $5 to $6 million a year." And then he went into, accountant speak, what Rich Baird, his assistant, calls dolphin speak, and started diving into these details, which I wasn't following. And I said, "So what are you going to do with this, Rick?" And he says, "I'm going to ask Gene for $100 million tomorrow." I said, "Rick, get the award first." And at any rate, late morning the next morning, he calls me, and his voice was ebullient, and he said, I had a very productive breakfast with Gene Gargaro this morning. I said, really, how productive? He said, I got you $100 million. I said, really? He said, yep. So I didn't want to call Gene right away to confirm it because, even smart people like Rick, in the words of Paul Simon in the song The Boxer, even smart people can hear what they want to hear and disregard the rest. So I kind of wanted to hear it fresh from Gene, and he did. He called me that afternoon. I said, how was your breakfast with the governor? And he said, that was the most expensive breakfast in history. So that was the third leg. And they ultimately pledged $100 million, which they raised in 9 months.
Unbelievable. And the rest is history. Now, did it ever occur to you to auction off the doodle for another 150 million?
I actually have had some offers for it. The irony there is, after this was all put together, I went into my office on a weekend to clean it because I could hardly get to my desk, and I was looking through the piles and I found the doodle. Gene just coincidentally was coming for lunch that week. I put it on my desk, and when he came in, I showed it to him. He knew immediately what it was, and he said, that's got to hang in the DIA. So we had a nice party at the DIA, and I donated it to the DIA, and it's hanging in the DIA now.
What a very generous thing you did. And what I would like to do is I'm going to get that doodle up on the screen here, along with a paw print from Franklin, and see how much money we can raise in addition. And
Sure.
And then whatever we raise, you and I will just go out to dinner.
Sure.
Yeah. Well, listen, this has been a wonderful half hour with you, sir. I am grateful and appreciative, and all people who are Detroiters should be grateful and appreciative because, man, oh man, I grew up in Detroit, and from 1967, when the riots occurred, until recent years, it was not a pleasant place to say you were from. And that all changed after the Grand Bargain, after Dan Gilbert came in and brought 17,000 of his employees to downtown Detroit and started buying up property and renovating and restoring Detroit to the glory that it once had. Having said that, I mean, it's a tough place, and we're gritty, and we're known for that. So, it's great that we were able to find our way back.
Mike, of all the things I'm proud of, and certainly the Grand Bargain and everything else but I'm very, very proud, this year and last year, I should say 2024 and 2023, the DIA was selected as the #1 art museum in the country.
Wow.
So imagine if we had lost it.
Imagine. Well, and also, I'm sure you probably neglected to mention your pride in being my neighbor. And
well, that's right up at the top of the list.
Yeah. And the last thing I would ask, if you don't mind, since you're there and I'm here, if you
Take
could
the garbage can.
shovel off the walk for me a little bit, just so make it look like there's someone there, and check my mailbox because they continually drop mail in there, even though they know I'm not there. So,
Mike, when you read the book, check out the stuff about John Woolman, our other neighbor. You'll appreciate it.
I will. Everybody, my good friend and honorable neighbor and friend, the Honorable Gerald Rosen, author of The Grand Bargain. You'll find that on the Amazon and on the publisher's website, but what difference is that?
Grandbargainbook.com.
Grandbargainbook.com.
Right.
Gary, thank you so much for joining us. This was a very worthwhile and eye-opening interview, and I'm just grateful that you took the time. Appreciate it.
It's been fun, Mike. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
All right, folks, we'll be right back. Thanks for
big hugs to Lori.
And same to Lori. We both have Lori wives. I love that.
We do.
All right. Good night, everybody. We'll be right back after these words from our sponsors.
I don't remember how it started.
Go to that.
Our back and forth. It always came back.
Dad!
You probably don't remember what you told me.
That was perfect.
But I heard every word.
Well, thanks everybody for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this particular edition of the Franklin Show. We'll be back next week with even more fabulous stuff. Franklin and I look forward to seeing you again next week. Enjoy, everybody.